In the renaissance of the retro shooter, another beloved title has been revived with Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition. Rise of the Triad, or Rise of the Triad Dark War, was originally developed and published by Apogee Software, initially released into shareware in 1994, with the full version following in 1995. While it didn't make as big of a splash compared to its FPS contemporaries, through the years it has earned a rich cult following, winning FPS fans over with its fun mechanics, over-the-top comical sensibilities, and addictive multiplayer, and is pointed to as a key influence for many of today's retro revival shooters. Ludicrous Edition was developed by Nightdive Studios and Apogee Software, and published by Apogee Entertainment and New Blood Interactive. It brings a slew of graphical and quality of life enhancements, and importantly is packed with content. In today's video, I will be lending my thoughts on this wacky cult shooter, and the work done in this remaster, all to help you decide if it belongs on your SSD. But before we begin, I want to say a big thank you to Apogee Entertainment for providing the review code. Alrighty, let's grab some dog bones and get ludicrous. Ludicrous Edition strives to be the definitive Rise of the Triad package, and as I mentioned before, is stuffed with content, practically overflowing with it. It features the initial 1994 shareware release, titled The Hunt Begins, which features 11 missions. The main campaign, Dark War, which is made up of 33 missions, Extreme Rise of the Triad, a 33-mission expansion, The Hunt Continues, a brand new campaign exclusive to this version that has 21 missions, the combat multiplayer mode that can be played through online, local, or LAN, an in-game level editor, and thrown in as a bonus, Return of the Triad, a follow-up / reimagining of Rise of the Triad built within GZ Doom. Stuffed indeed. For transparency, this review is based on a full playthrough of the Hunt Begins shareware, Dark War campaign, and the new Hunt Continues campaign. Rise of the Triad, or ROT as I'm going to call it from here on out, was initially envisioned by Apogee as a direct sequel to id Software's Wolfenstein 3D, going as far as to hire one of Wolf's original designers, Tom Hall, to direct it. At the time, Tom Hall had just been let go from id due to creative differences on the development of Doom, and saw it as an opportunity to not only get employment, but implement some of his ideas that didn't make it into the legendary shooter. It should be noted, however, that despite letting him go, id Software assisted Tom Hall on ROT's development, and while there might have been hurt feelings, there was hardly any bad blood. With the project greenlit, Tom Hall and his dev team, nicknamed the developers of Incredible Power, recycled much of Wolf's original code to speed up development and created artwork for the new Nazi enemies and World War II inspired weaponry. Around 6 to 8 months into the project though, id, who still controlled the Wolfenstein IP, requested the project be cancelled. There's not a clear answer as to why, but the consensus is that id Software was nervous about a Wolfenstein sequel taking attention away from Doom, which was still in development. And so, to salvage the project, the Wolfenstein license was dropped and it was turned into its own standalone game, with all assets created for it recycled and adjusted. The silver lining of this, though, is that it freed the dev team up to put more original and wacky ideas into the game, which in the long run helped make it stand out. Although the Wolfenstein vibe can still very much be felt in ROT. ROT revolves around the High-Risk United Nations Task Force, or HUNT, a team of Special Forces operatives. The beginning of the game has HUNT infiltrating San Nicolas Island to investigate dangerous cult activity within a monastery. Sure enough, as soon as they land, they battle a fierce death cult led by the magical El Oscuro, who has quite the head on him. Soon after, Hunt learns that the cult plans to attack and destroy nearby Los Angeles. Oh no. It's now up to Hunt to stop this nefarious plot and prevent the rise of the Triad. So don't fail. ROT was developed in a modified version of the Wolfenstein 3D engine, which, yes, by the time of ROT's release, was a few good steps in the realm of obsolete. However, this didn't stop Apogee from squeezing as much juice as possible from it and code in new features, like variable heights for the walls, panoramic skies, simulated dynamic lighting, fog, bullet holes, breakable glass, levels with actual ceilings, and most notably the floating platforms that would help define the game. Sure, you can sniff out Wolf 3D's rendering qualities, but ROT is a sizable and impressive step up. Instead of rendering enemies as cartoonish sprites, Apogee opted to use digitized actors being members of ROT's development team, giving the game a more quote-unquote realistic look that helped it stay competitive with other more advanced shooters of the time. Rot is an eccentric game, and its eccentricities mostly lie in its art direction. Levels have little interest in looking like realistic, tangible places, instead appearing like elaborate, monolithic obstacle courses that feel like they belong in some sort of twisted game show. And the droves of booby traps and big collectible tokens give it a real video gamey vibe. Nothing looks quite like it, at least as far as FPSs go. A new player might be forgiven for raising an eyebrow at the absurdity of its visuals. If you're unfamiliar with Tom Hall's games, something to know is that this man loves all things silly and humorous, and that is certainly felt in Rot. Most of the laughs can be found in gameplay, which we'll touch on, but Rot goes out of its way to slip in funny wherever it can. For instance, the goofy difficulty descriptions switch up with every new game, and quitting to desktop brings a variety of elaborate taunts towards the player. Truly, this game wants to put a smile on your face any way it can. Personally, Rot's visuals are not my favorite. The abstract environments contrasted with the digitized enemies is a level of bizarre that did take me out of the experience at times. And there are some problematic choices, like enemy color schemes that can cause them to blend in, making them hard to see, especially at a distance, and low-lit areas were a source of irritation, as these levels often have large zones packed with baddies that hit scan. So not only will you not be able to see them, they can cheaply wipe you out in the dark. That being said, I can't deny that these visuals give Rot its distinct personality, which has helped it endure as a cult classic. And as I said before, there's really no other shooter that looks quite like it. Nightdive's work here is in line with their other remaster efforts. They've taken Rot's original code, absorbed it into their magical KIRK engine, and used it as a means to add improvements. Improvements being widescreen resolutions up to 4K, enhanced lighting, and a smooth, uncapped frame rate. And when we compare to the original version, the enhancements are clear. There's different HUD styles that the player can now choose from, as well as the ability to customize their crosshair. And for the purists who don't like all this fancy stuff, they have the option to turn it all off and make the game look close to its 1995 original. Beyond that though, Nightdive has taken a pretty light touch here. While they might have touched them up here and there, textures and enemy sprites remain true to the original and still look decent. Something to note is that there are now female versions of the enemies. The lady sprites were drawn for the original game, but for whatever reason were cut. Now you can enjoy the cries of your enemies in high and low pitches.
Here she is!
Speaking of audio, Rot's original soundscape is here and all sorts of clear, for better and worse. Like its visuals, Rot's soundtrack is full of goofy personality. It's high-spirited, a little on the corny side, but nonetheless helps drive the energy of the game. It definitely got my head bopping, and while it's over the top, never got on my nerves. I can see why Civi likes to use it in his videos. For the remaster, players have the choice of playing the music in a few different flavors of soundboard, and have the option to use the soundtrack from the 2013 remake, a nice archival touch. Enemy taunts sound clean and clear, however their repetitive cries from taking damage is something that did get irritating after a while. Unfortunately, where I found issues with Ludicrous Edition's presentation was with its stability. Now, in terms of moment-to-moment gameplay, I ran into almost zero bugs. No, what I had to deal with in my playthrough was corrupted saves and numerous crashes. One day, for whatever reason, my save file in Quick Save File gave me this error message, and since those were my only saves at the time, I was forced to use a cheat code to get back to my spot. Another instance, I was able to load my save, but after about 10 seconds, the game would freeze, once again forcing me to cheat to restart the level. I have no clue what was causing this, same with the crashes that seemed to happen at random and on the KIRK engine level. Now, I did inform Apogee of these issues, so hopefully by the time this review drops, there have already been some patches. But it's still worth mentioning and something to watch out for. Rot's absurdity absolutely makes it stand out among 90s first-person shooters. However, at its core, it follows the same structure as its contemporaries. The main campaign is spread between 4 episodes with around 6 to 8 missions each. Each mission throws the player into an elaborate maze where they must progress by hunting down keys, solve rudimentary puzzles, and wipe out all that stands in their way. Classic as it gets. Players have a choice between 5 different characters, each with varying stats being their health, accuracy, and movement speed. I think the impact of these stats heavily rely on the skill of the player, but they can make the game slightly easier or harder. Even though Rot released after Doom, to me the gameplay feels like the middle point between Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Its level design is nowhere near the complexity of Doom's, but is a clear iteration on Wolf 3D's. And the speed and responsiveness of Rot's combat I would say matches Doom's. The shooting is poppy, old school satisfying, and what punches it up are the goofy enemy damage animations. They really make you feel like you're pumping these goons full of lead, and some of them are wonderfully extra. Like these guys looking like they're doing twister moves, and the monks who are pretty much doing the time warp. Rot's enemies were also novel for their behaviors. Some enemies are able to dodge roll from your attacks, which is rather effective. Some will beg for their lives, and some will play dead and ambush you, something that always caught me off guard. Drop it! Ah man, you made me shoot the token. This may not seem like that big of a deal, but there weren't many FPSs around this time that designed their baddies this way, and I would say it helps them feel more alive and unpredictable. Rot was considered a Doom clone upon release, which wasn't a stretch due to its gameplay and development team. However, Rot has some distinct differences from Doom that many today credit as genre innovations. For starters, Rot is credited with being the first FPS to feature dual wielding, an honor it shares with Bungie's Marathon, as they were both released on the same day. Good gaming trivia right there. Another notable difference is Rot's weapon system. Unlike most retro shooters that allowed players to carry an arsenal of up to 10 weapons, Rot limits them to just 4. The first 3 weapons are permanent fixtures: pistol, dual pistols, and the MP40, each with unlimited ammo, an unusual choice for the time. The 4th slot is for heavy weapons, which do have limited ammo, often only a handful of shots. These consist of explosive weapons and magic weapons, however the explosive ones dominate it, with multiple flavors of rocket launcher, like the simple straightforward bazooka, homing missiles, and the drunken missiles that launch a flurry of booms that may or may not hit the target. Go home, missiles. You're drunk. Only one weapon can be held in the 4th slot at a time. When you find a new type, it swaps with the old one right there, and yes, you are able to swap back. This makes weapon management and backtracking go hand in hand whenever you want to switch up your arsenal. And ammo cannot be stacked when duplicates are found. So if you have a bazooka with 2 shots and find another with 10, you're going to trade that 2-shot one for the 10. What's interesting is that this weapon system is not all that different from the limited weapon systems popularized in Halo and Call of Duty, which is fascinating when you consider that these franchises were, roughly half a decade away from debuting? I can't really say it makes gameplay feel majorly different from other mid-90s shooters, but it is cool the devs were trying to get the player to think about their weapons a little differently compared to something like Doom, and it could be argued that de-emphasizing ammo collection does keep the action a little more consistent. Past jibbing and disintegrating enemies, Rot's combat ultimately ends up revolving around a lot of stun locking. Your bullet weapons, the MP40 especially, can easily keep most enemy types held in place until they are a clump of floor sprites. However, enemies can also do the same to you. It's more of a soft stun lock, but taking fire will slow your movement considerably, and if only a couple machine gun toting enemies start hitting you, it's enough to trap you in place and melt your health in seconds. And most enemies are hit scanners, making this difficult to escape. So success boils down to shooting them before they have a chance to shoot you. It's simplistic, but it works. I think this drives a lot of the fun of combat and pushes players to be as fast and twitchy as possible. It's a good challenge, especially on harder difficulties, and presents a risk-reward element when taking on groups, as a few missed shots or missed tells can be devastating. And you can't always lean on the stun lock. Some enemy types have special attacks to counter you, like the officers that can ensnare you in a net, and there are some enemies that are flat out immune to bullets. Time power-ups are a big highlight of Rot, giving you extraordinary supernatural powers like being able to fly. My favorite of them is the bone that turns you into a dog, letting you slip into unreachable areas and bite enemies to death. Nom nom nom. And look at how his whittle paw opens doors. The funniest is God Mode, turning you into a floating deity that can zap enemies with a simple click, moaning and yawning with your godly powers. Legend has it, John Romero's heavenly voice was recorded for this. Some of the power-ups are straight up trolls though, and I have to say I absolutely despise them. Like Elastic Mode, which makes you violently bounce off the walls, which is disorienting and just plain annoying. Sure, it's used in some clever obstacle courses, but otherwise I avoided these like the plague. The worst though is the Magic Mushroom, which warps the level and scrambles your aim, making it incredibly difficult to navigate and shoot. It's certainly an impressive effect for the Wolfenstein engine to pull off, but Mushroom Mode is about as fun as an actual bad trip. In all, I enjoyed Rot's combat. It's straightforward, but sucks you in with how fast and frantic it is, and the gore is worth some chuckles. I do have my criticisms though, and a big one is that I wish there was more variety in the arsenal. Yeah, there's certainly different missile launchers and a few magic weapons to play with, but it would have been cool to see other weapon types or even more hokey novelty ones. The other thing too is that when I got to the later episodes, I just found little reason to use anything other than my MP40 and a heavy type for the stronger enemies. The dual pistols are fun to use and actually slightly stronger than the MP40, but they don't come close to its ability to stun, and in the later episodes, that's what's gonna win you the day. They ended up feeling pointless to me. And yeah, the lack of variety gets kinda dull. Towards the end of my time with Rot, it was less the combat keeping me hooked and more the creative level design. I think it's safe to say the level design of Rot is a big part of what has kept it memorable. As I said earlier, Rot is not concerned with presenting realistic levels. This is a video game in bold capital letters, and the goal of its bizarre obstacle courses is to excite and challenge the player as much as possible. Making sense is low on priorities. That's not to say these levels don't have some logic to them or narrative motivation. There's definitely some visual clues as to what purpose these places serve, as well as imagery that could spark the player's imagination to fill in the gaps. But don't get it twisted. These maps are gameplay driven first and foremost, and you can tell the devs were really trying to present the player with something different and fun every map. And at best, they left me entertained, if not a little confused. And at worst, had me tearing my hair out. The first thing to note is how dynamic the levels are. Moving walls were a feature used in Wolf 3D to hide secrets. And Rot, they are ever present, sliding through levels, smashing anything in their way, or revealing the critical path. More treacherous are the pillars of smoldering lava that can fry you to a crisp, complemented by a plethora of spiked booby traps, drop pits, and fireballs. So many fireballs. Sure, it may be strange to look at, but it's a lot of fun to get through. Truly, it made me feel like I was trapped within some warped, deadly game show. Like I was the Running Man. The auto-running man.
Stop it.
Levels are full of jumping, or should I say gliding puzzles. You can't actually jump in Rot, but you will find numerous spring pads that will launch you into the air, letting you reach high areas and collect giant tokens to earn extra lives. They can also spice up combat if your enemies happen to use them too. It's a lot of simple pleasure fun using these, especially when they can zip you through a level. The floating platforms are a defining aspect of Rot's eccentric personality, offering simplistic yet enjoyable platforming puzzles and giving verticality to a game whose engine was unable to render rooms on top of rooms. Moving between platforms can feel awkward, but the game is very forgiving in terms of their surface area, and the player will have some generous coyote time if they accidentally start sliding off.
Outsider!
I found many of Rot's maps to be fun to charge through, particularly within the Shareware campaign and the first episode of the Dark War campaign. However, the design does go off the rails a bit in episodes 2 and 3. I experienced maps with super elaborate and complex layouts, which look pretty nifty on the map screen, but navigating them can be confusing to the point of frustration. I found myself often scouring my map screen, hunting for that tiny key door I missed or barely legible pressure plate I passed, which slowed the pace down quite a bit. To be fair, the game aids you in in one clever way by highlighting blocks that have moved in green so you can keep track of what's been changed after hitting a switch. This was a huge help for me in these more complex levels, but adding to the frustration were the enemy and trap placements, which were antagonistic to say the least, meant to put players in rock and hard place type situations that were outright cheap at times. This is also where we see a lot of the black coat enemies, who I learned the hard way to always save my missiles for, because taking them out with the pistols or MP40 is like trying to knock out the Rock with a wiffle ball bat. It takes a while. And their yeet grenades had me hitting quick load more than I care to admit. These guys were a real speed bump for my enjoyment. I wouldn't say episodes 2 and 3 were devoid of fun, there are certainly some standout maps in them, but ultimately they left me exhausted and I was happy to get them over with. The fourth and final episode of Dark War is an improvement, featuring tighter, focused level design with an even greater emphasis on environmental hazards. These maps I really enjoyed, although the monk enemies introduced are the most boring to fight in the game. Their attacks are certainly devastating if they land, but these guys are easily stun-locked with the MP40, and their spongy health makes killing them with anything other than magic or missiles a chore. I mean, I was relieved to be away from the black coats, but after killing a dozen or so monks, I was begging for them to come back so I could at least have a little more challenge. Fortunately, the final boss brings a lot of challenge and then some. It's also really, really weird. The brand new campaign, The Hunt Continues, was a breath of fresh air compared to Dark War. The Hunt Continues was developed by members of Apogee, New Blood, and Nightdive Studios, and beautifully represents not only their love for this game, but also their map-making expertise. The design of these maps is certainly in line with ROT's game show obstacle course feel and feature a ton of complexity, but flow a lot smoother with a steadier pace that isn't afraid to throw some insanity at you. Despite complexity, their design naturally leads the player where they need to go, with some telegraphs to help them along, keeping confusion at a minimum. They also look really good. You can tell the designers went out of their way to have a lot more texture variety and used the geometry in creative ways to make them stand out. For me, this new campaign was a highlight of Ludicrous Edition, and a clear labor of love from their authors. Rise of the Triad is a good, fun, goofy time with a crap ton of personality. I can't say it's my favorite old school shooter in the world. There's some frustrating design here that dragged it down for me, especially in the latter levels of Dark War. However, its gameplay is simple, fast, and fun, and its sense of humor is hard not to be charmed by. Plus, the work done on this remaster gives longtime fans a lot of content and a lot more clarity. And I'm always happy when games like this are preserved in this way for newer generations to enjoy. I think hardcore Rise of the Triad fans are going to be in love with this. As far as I can tell, this is the ultimate expression of this cult classic, and those obsessed with retro shooters will definitely find something to enjoy here, as well as some fun history to absorb. However, for the FPS fans who might not have a ton of tolerance for this sort of old school design, or just aren't into silly stuff in their shooters, I would say it's safe to skip this one. And that's it for me. What are your thoughts on Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. And once again, I want to say a big thank you to Apogee for providing the review code. If you dug the video, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and smack that bell. If you want to come say hi, my Discord is linked below, along with my affiliate links. I'm KIRK, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.